Hello everyone, just a brief video today about the colonization of the medieval countryside by seigneurial powers and more in general the management properly of the populations on their own territories, as the power holders were always very careful about their settlement of men, of population, did not obstacle but on the contrary would favor and protect the exercise of their dominion. You would be curious to know how they achieved this. Well, in many ways they already had a control on the populations just because of the contracts. As we've seen recently, we made videos on the seigneurial system, on the same peasant liberties just the other day. And so properly this mentality, exactly by the way in the centuries we're looking at now. Today we will look at two examples, basically one from the Canossa holdings in northern Italy and the one of the kings of France, both during the 12th century, so it's the same century we're talking about the day before while addressing the Walzer, the Reconquista and Alberstadt, right? So it's important to cover the broader European picture. And in the first example, like in the first years of the 12th century, the Countess Mathilda of Canossa, that, as you know, was the heiress of an enormous set of possessions, properly straddling the Apennines between the Po Valley and Tuscany, and reaching, in fact, the Alpine foothills in the north and controlling most of Tuscany in the south, reserved for herself and to her successors the right to essentially move the castle and the burg of Governolo. That was crucial, also famous military history because it was a passage, was a bridge on the Po River, right? There were important battles fought. Think about, I don't know, the contention of the crossing by the imperial army of Frundsberg against Giovanni de' Medici of the Black Bands in the Renaissance, and later on even during the wars of Italian independence, there were multiple fights fought over that bridge. This is close to Mantua, right? It already by itself was a massive fortress, properly on the river, right? With properly an island, etc. And this right is crucial because it basically allows it's a self-allowing, right? So it already shows the enormous power, in fact, the Canossa had at the time on these territories that were crucial because, as you know, the Canossa were invested with whole investiture controversy. They were actually married into the German royal dynasty. They in fact controlled this passes for the imperial army to enter Italy and to reach Rome. The famous humiliation of Henry IV after the excommunication at the same castle of Canossa by the Pope, with Mathilda there that pushed for the reconciliation. So this is not just anecdotal why Governolo was important, because it was one of those points on the map that you had to control with greater ease, right? So in essence, what this is really crucial about the colonization aspect is that not much about the fortress per se, but literally the people that live there, right? The community that has to defend. I mean, every fortification without active defense is nothing, right? Doesn't have any strategic value whatsoever, if not in expectation of in fact its control, but it cannot provide for any active military capacity if it's not manned. And so properly the amount of people that could be shifted in other areas around wherever it was more needed on the base of that, and it was not just a military need, right? There, especially in northern Italy, we've seen it in different instances that there was such an intense monetary economy that the Motte and Bailey castles that were built were not really built all by the nobility, or even when they were, they would be sold literally on the market. What do you do? I just built Motte and Bailey castles, and I don't use them to become a lord myself. I just sell them to others and make money out of that, right? That's the general. And in fact, even this super territorial dominations stretching across different regions as you know, would melt away. The Canossa being kind of one of the best examples of that, as basically these were the same years in which the communes were rising, and that kind of political um, territorial domination would even geographically dissolve. You wouldn't see it because this level of nobility would eventually dissolve in favor of the power of the cities that were still controlled, namely by the Marquisate of Tuscany, but that wouldn't last in the long run. So that tells you how how fluid naturally this need also to shift the population really was, because it could happen for very easily, right? And that's why the Countess wanted to stress the right of doing that. And in fact, speaking of the communes, this aspect is exactly, at least prefigures one of the aspects that of the one that will be the policy of the great communes of central northern Italy. That is the intervention of the same communes on the broader frame of rural population in their own districts and even outside of them, that contemplated the foundation of burghs and villages, right? And that entails sometimes the transfer of entire inhabited centers with their together with their populations for mostly economical. Also, there was still the unknown in Italy, like the idea properly of how much people do you want to make work at this public supply of the city, because the city was fundamentally existing because of this enormous agricultural surplus that, however, had to be produced by somebody, by a working force. So it's an important management of the local populations that are already, as you understand here, disposed of by a major power, and of course with all the other needs that could arise. I mean, the strengthening in general of the political presence of the commune in the countryside, also for military reasons, etc. And this is exactly the same thing that the kings of France, during all the 12th century, would do by using the foundations of the ville neuve. If you wonder what the famous surname, toponym, whatever, Villeneuve comes from in France, it's exactly this one. Were new towns, new villages, essentially. There's exactly the same thing in Italy, Villanova, for example. Because these are medieval toponyms that date exactly to this phase of the High Middle Ages, where the local establishment would decide literally the foundation of a new town or new village, whatever, and for in this colonial guise, right? In ancient times, we are used to think about, I don't know, the Phoenician colonies, the Hellenic colonies, the Roman colonies, etc. And by the way, other peoples didn't have cities, but they would still do basically the same thing in terms of settlement, migration, etc. I say in the Middle Ages, you never heard the term colony, really. Well, they had it. They had it in the same way, right? And sometimes even in a more, as you understand, orchestrated fashion, in order to, the case of France here, for example, to definitely to empower and pacify the royal lands, the royal assets, and to reinforce their own ties with the populations as well. Because if you had just also other people that depended on you, because they, as we've seen, they mostly had given away part of their personal freedom in exchange for protection, and they were somewhat loyal in that case, or at least unavoidably dependent on the royal cause, by settling them in a place that maybe doesn't like the crown too much, because maybe it's trying to become more autonomous or whatever. You put these people there, and so where in another, they are a force. They also have a deterrence. These people have militias, right? They owe, for example, like in communal Italy, the communal army was made up at the core by the citizens that were the richest kind of freemen in the city, but of the peasants as well, right? And very often also the larger amount quantitatively speaking. So in many ways, if you look even at the French armies at this time, it's the same thing. There are a lot of villains that are literally drawn from there. Northern France, of course, the infantry didn't have, say, as much of a great influence like in other areas, like the aforementioned Italian Communes, but still, actually, that's probably underrated, right? Also because the French mostly exalted their own seigneurial / feudal chivalric military that is knightly class, but we know, of course, that numerically speaking, the majority of people was made up, the majority of the army was made up of infantry, and of course, this infantry came from the countryside largely. Also, there were communes in France as well. There were towns, right? There were everywhere, like in Germany, in Spain, etc. But this aspect of properly having even the power of disposing for a political and strategic reason of large amount of populace in your own territory so that you could displace them and resettle them elsewhere, well, it's really remarkable. It's really an indicator, an index of the degree of power that the seigneuries had reached by high medieval times, this at the end of the high medieval times, say in the 12th century, to essentially maintain the establishment as such, as the aforementioned example in those prerogatives of Mathilda of Canossa, for example, were surely not. I don't know whether Mantua had some other, how much it capitalized upon it, say, also because the Mathildic inheritance was an enormous problem, as you know, between the Holy Roman Emperors and the popes, an object of content. But again, the local communes would do the same thing. So these forms of population control were to remain and were to actually consolidate and solidify over time, right? But especially at this time, they were so fluid and dynamic because there was a massive demographic and economic boom. So literally, these powers had never disposed before of so many people and so many resources to do and so consequently also so much power to dispose the former of as they pleased. What else to add? Well, of course, there is all an historiography about this. The French studied this stuff a lot. Also, the Italians studied this stuff a lot. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of in-depth researches in these things. I personally never studied them. I attended some class, some conference, I don't remember, but say they are interesting. You can discover lots of things through that. And the best thing, as always, and this is a bit of something that I would like to do on Schwerpunkt, and that we are still at the beginning. I mean, Schwerpunkt is only 4 years old, right? Has not even started going to school, and so my dream is time allowing and lots of other things allowing to actually cover in detail this stuff at some point. I actually wrote an article, and I want to make a video about something similar that has to do properly with war and how the enemies would kind of eat up the City-Distrct from their private possessions in the countryside by, in fact, harassing the populations, controlling certain choke points. I mean, it's very strategical, also very logistic if you look at it from that perspective. And things ended badly for the city, by the way. Albeit it was not really the noblemen per se that took over, but rather a massive power from the outside. In any case, I'm planning to do that soon. And I hope these two examples are nice. I still haven't, that I've resumed some kind of French history more significantly, because I'm making that series about the historical regions, but I also moved to other countries, and we will keep talking hopefully about 12th century France soon. We never made a video about Mathilda of Canossa, which is also a shame for Schwerpunkt time frame, and instead that's an important chapter we have to make up for the absence of, at least quickly. For today, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like, or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time.